I think we are ready to start. Thank you. Distinguished speakers, dear participants, I'm delighted to be your moderator for the session. A very good afternoon to each and every one of you. My name is Theoporina Mshenje, and I am the Fanarapan Node Coordinator in Namibia. And I'm also a lecturer at the University of Namibia, Faculty of Agriculture and Natural Resources. I would like to warmly welcome all participants to this East and Southern Africa Regional Food Systems Dialogue that is titled Building Resilient and Sustainable Food Systems in Africa, Mobilizing African Voices and Building Momentum for the UN Food Systems Summit. The dialogue is organized by the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, also known as FANARAPAN, and Academia 2063. I should also mention that Africa development cannot be achieved by one institution or organization. We need to work together so that our programs really respond to needs of our regions. Hence the importance of partnership between FANARAPAN and Academia 2063 in organizing this dialogue. Now, in line with the Food Systems Dialogue principles of engagement, the Africa Regional Food Systems Dialogue series embraces multi-stakeholder inclusivity. The dialogue is bringing together a wide range of stakeholders directly involved in moving food from farm to fork. Participants include representatives of the research or scientific community, and also include government, as well as civil society, the private sector, and also farmers groups. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to give you some important housekeeping rules to be able to facilitate our session. Please note that this event provides French and Portuguese live interpretation. To access the interpretation, look for the little globe icon on the bottom left of your screen and click your preferred language, whether it's English, French, or Portuguese. You may write your questions in the chat box and we will try our utmost best to respond to them. Also, please note that this session is being recorded. That said, with the housekeeping rules, I have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Shilinzi Mazivandila, and he's the CEO and head of mission of FANARAPAN, for welcome remarks and also to give us the objectives of the meeting. Dr. Mazivandila, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Program Director. All protocols are observed. Ladies and gentlemen, for and on behalf of FANAPAN, which is the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Network, FANAPAN is a network of networks. I think I need to emphasize that we are a network of networks. I welcome you to this United Nations Food Systems Summit Independent Dialogue under the theme, Building Resilient and Sustainable Food System in Africa. We are here to mobilize African voices and to build momentum for 2021 United Food Systems Summit. This is not one of the dialogues that we're convening, but is part of the initiative that we're undertaking. A few factors have served as the wind beneath our wings, spurring us to continue with our effort to convene dialogues in midst of COVID-19 pandemic. We know that then we'll not be able to travel, but then these virtual platforms are allowing us to meet and to mobilize these African voices so that we make sure that as Africa, we have got a united voice and a common voice that we are submitting to the summit. Firstly, the summit has served as an agonizer to our ongoing regional and continental objectives and targets to transform our agriculture. The global summit has also brought with its sense an agency and excitement. And I should say here that genuinely, we have got desire to make sure that then this brings solution rather than to present the problems. On the back of that, I urge fellow stakeholders from the Eastern and Southern Africa region to take advantage of these platforms to ensure that as Africans, we have got a global platform which then we present our common voice. And to this background, secondly, building and nurturing stakeholders' interest in dialogues related to upcoming 2021 UNFSS naturally fell into the FANAP lab. And this is because the convening and multi-stakeholder dialogues that FANAP convenes allows people to come together to converse and to also then talk about issues that are pertinent to South African food and natural resources issues. Let me also acknowledge that then amongst these, as FANAPAN, we have convened and we are still going to convene other platforms that are related to this work. Let me then mention a few partners that we have collaborated with. The first one to mention is that then a few months ago, we have convened a platform with FARA, with its Caterpillar 4 institutions, to mention them, CORAF, Azareka, CADES, and AFAS. Then for Southern African climate smart agriculture, we also have convened a platform for that. And also then with partnership with the University of Leeds, we've also then convened a dialogue to say, what is it that as South Africans or as Africans, can we build resilient systems? Most recently with CARE Southern Africa, then we've convened a platform to dialogue about pertinent issues in terms of how are we performing in terms of delivering to Malabo Declaration. To summarize, Madam Chair and ladies and gentlemen, this multiple convening is premised on the realization that agriculture transformation will require all hands on the deck. And I'm asking for each one of us then to really then bring their effort in terms of making sure that we are delivering towards the transformation of African agriculture. To that end, I would like to extend a welcome to everyone joining this dialogue. Let's mobilize, open quote, African voice and build momentum toward UN Food System Summit, close quote. September is not too far. And let's make sure that then when we dialogue about these issues, then we premise this then upon our vision, which is about a resilient Africa agriculture and food system to secure prosperity and health for all. We are delivering this vision as FANAPAN based on two thematic areas, which is climate smart agriculture and nutrition sensitive agriculture. And of course, women and youth empowerment for us is very important. And with this welcome address, I wish you, ladies and gentlemen, a fruitful discussion for this dialogue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mazivandira, for welcoming us to the session and for giving us the objectives of the meeting. Now that we know the objectives of the meeting, allow me to introduce the next speaker, who is Mrs. Providence Mavumbi, for the opening remarks. Madam Mavumbi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I lost a bit of network. I don't know if it is my time to speak, moderator.
Yes, it is, madam. It's your time.
Good afternoon. I'm not able to get any sound from your side.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, right now I hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes. You may give the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Dr. Chizili Madivandira, CEO and Head Mission of FANLAPAN. Dr. Bahigwa, Director of Agriculture, Rural Development and Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, African Union Commission. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the COMESA Secretary General, I'm pleased to make the opening remarks at this East and Southern Africa Regional Food System Dialogue on building resilient and sustainable food system in Africa. I would like to commend FANLAPAN and Academia 2063 for organizing and inviting COMESA to be part of this very important dialogue where we are mobilizing African voices and building momentum for the UN Food System Summit. Food systems form part of the largest economic sector of most countries in the African region, including the COMESA, ranging from production to industry and services. It is also one of the leading employment sector with strong forward and backward linkages within rural setting and with other sectors of the economies. It is important to note, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, African agriculture and food system were faced with daunting challenge of concurrently providing food and nutrition security to African growing population, advancing equitable livelihood for millions of people working along the agriculture and the agri-food value chain, and ensuring the environmental sustainability of the sector. The pandemic have aggravated the challenge in a complex way, leading to loss of livelihood and incomes, increased food insecurity, and environmental degradation. The African population is projected to double by 2050. That will be 2.5 billion people, meaning more than a quarter of the world's people will be in Africa, and requiring a significant increase in the production of affordable, healthy, and nutritious food. This presents opportunity, but also challenge for the agriculture and food sector. The African population is increasingly urban, and this is equally increasing demand for food and fuel, and does present new market opportunity as well as challenges for farmers, entrepreneurs, agribusiness in the continent. The increased urbanization will change the way food is purchased and marketed. On the supply side, there will be growing competition for land, energy, and water, and thus implying that more food will need to be produced with less resources. Ladies and gentlemen, sustained investments are needed to improve the resiliency of agriculture and food system to the multitude of shocks and stress, flood, drought, animal and crop pests, conflict, etc., to transform African food and agriculture system in a manner that would make it climate smart, resilient, and sustainable. We must ensure that rural communities, who are often the most vulnerable people in the region, are resilient in the face of climate change and its effects. Increased resiliency is essential if food security and livelihood and other sustainable development goals are to be met in the context of a changing climate and the other environmental emergencies. We need to embrace innovation while also drawing on traditional practices and time-tested agriculture methods, promote renewable energy, and improve the quality of food and diets. The different stakeholders, including the scientific community, policymaker, international organization, NGOs, agriculture producers, and the consumer group need to act in a concerted manner for the transformation of African food system to be realized. The government and its institution would also need to review where necessary, reform existing policy and regulation that jeopardize sustainability and reduce resiliency, as well as to revisit current resiliency toolkits for farmers and other producers faced with shock to ensure to promote sustainable practices. As a continent, Africa needs to give great focus on further opening up of markets and enhance intra-regional trade in agricultural commodities and foods. And this would require that we effectively address sanitary and phytosanitary and food safety issues. The COMESA SADC EAC tripartite arrangement and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement present a huge opportunity for enhancing intra-Africa trade in agricultural commodity and food for improved African food and nutrition security. Africa will also need to significantly increase resources to support agricultural research as a public good to develop, transfer, and disseminate technology, innovation, and management practices for building resiliency of agriculture and the food system in the continent. This technology, innovation, and management practices need to be well adapted to agroecological context, be market responsive, and climate resilient. COMESA work with several public institutions and the private sector in facilitating and coordinating the implementation of the comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program to guide the public and the private investment in agriculture, natural resources, trade, food security in the COMESA region to contribute to the realization of the goals and the aspiration of the CADA Malabo commitment. Together with member state and partner, COMESA developed a regional food and nutritional plan that is designed to address immediate and short-term food and nutrition security and the livelihood needed of the vulnerable and medium food security and livelihood economic need of the population. The plan integrates its intervention into the long-term regional agriculture development and food security agenda. COMESA is also specifically promoting and supporting member states to adopt climate-smart agriculture practices and technology to enhance resiliency of the agriculture production system in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, there is urgent need to build the resiliency of African agriculture and the food system. African governments and the East institutions need to develop and strengthen policies, practices, and programs that will help Africans address the challenge of enhancing inclusive food and nutrition security, equitable livelihood, and environmental sustainability. This will require strong collaboration and partnership between the public, private sector, including civil society organizations. COMESA is open to partnership that will help leverage technical and financial resources for building the resiliency of agriculture and the food system, as well as ecosystem biodiversity in the region. I wish you a fruitful dialogue, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mavumbi, for the opening remarks. And one of the things I got from your opening remarks, I got so many things, but one of them is that African population is increasingly urban, and we need to find solutions to produce more food with less resources and to be able to achieve food security. This dialogue is one of the platforms to be able to do that. And we will hopefully come up with action plans and strategies during our discussions. Now, allow me to now introduce a video that gives us an overview of the Food Systems Summit Dialogue process. So we'll play a video now. Thank you, for about 5 minutes.
Your Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, as you know, last year the UN Secretary General called for a food system summit to unleash the power of food to drive progress across all 17 United Nations development goals. I thank you for stepping forward to become a leader for the food systems change. These dialogues bring together people from all parts of society to share evidence, experience, and new ideas. Food is powerful. The food we eat brings us together as families, as communities, and as nations. It underpins our culture, our economies, and our relationship with the natural world. The world's food system touches every aspect of human existence, which makes them valuable instruments of change. The reason we are having a summit this year, and the reason we're here today, is because we are off track. We are not set to achieve on our shared vision and goals for the 2030 agenda. Our food systems have staggering levels of inequality. Our key priority for this summit is to bring more inclusive, equitable, and healthier food systems while also safeguarding our planet. These dialogues are a core element of the summit process. They are an opportunity to come together and identify priorities and actions to be taken for a better future. This will be a people's summit, but it will also be a solution summit because everyone is part of the food system. We are looking to get all of you and your ideas around the table to ensure that action is owned and driven by different actors. We want action to be driven by you. Your leadership and ability to have courageous conversations rather than avoid them will be very critical. If we can't have courageous conversations about what needs to change and how we need to work together, then we won't be able to go very far. We need each of you to determine the food system you want for your future and to act on it to make them a reality. We must do this understanding fully well our place in the world and that what we do as individuals impacts on others. I look forward to working with you in this summit process. Together, we can build a world of inclusive growth, environmental sustainability, and social justice. We can build a resilient world where no one is hungry, no one is poor, and no one is left behind. I thank you.
Wow, that is great. Together we can build a world where there is no hunger, hunger-free. We can do it together. Now we'll move on to our discussion, and we'll have a facilitator for the discussion panel. And Professor Simbanda will be the one to facilitate. I would like to hand over to Prof. Simbanda to facilitate the discussion panel. Prof. Simbanda, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Program Director. If I can just go ahead and share my screen. I think we've heard from the opening remarks that our work is really cut out for us. And essentially, I think the presentation from COMESA was very much on point. And the video we've just seen from the special envoy of the UN, that is Dr. Agnes Kalibata, is a case in point. Just to zero in on what Dr. Kalibata said, that we basically are not on track to delivering on the common vision on the SDGs, particularly the one that's dealing with food and nutrition security, SDG 2, and also the related ones. And the fact that we see as a critical role of food systems besides being a source of sustenance and nutrition. I mean, there are a lot of social roles that she pointed out. However, the effect still remains, despite all this, we are not on track. However, in terms of solutions, we're looking to have an inclusive, equitable food system, a food system that cares about the future, makes sure that we are in harmony with our environment. And of course, she's saying this has to be a people's summit. And this dialogue is part of that. All ideas are welcome. and we need to be action-oriented and focus on solutions. However, you still need to know what your challenges are, your problems are, before you can talk solutions. And ultimately, this has to be a democratic process in the sense that we all have a voice, we all have a say in what would constitute the kind of food system that we want. So I'm just going to share a few slides before we go into the discussion. We've got a group of, with 5 eminent discussants who are going to unravel and try to unpack this subject for us. But first of all, I just want us to see, where are we in terms of our performance as far as Africa is concerned in the food systems? We do, of course, have the Malabo CAADP commitments as our key framework document that's guiding how, as Africans, we're tackling the issue of food and nutrition security and food systems. Now, you would be aware that we have the biennial review reporting system, which is Africa's way of being accountable to its citizenry for its performance on the Malabo commitments. Just historically too, for those who may not be aware, the heads of states and government of African member states agreed in 2014 in Malabo on what is become now known as the Malabo Declaration, where they made commitments. There were 7 commitments. And these commitments are on your screen. One was to recommit to the CAADP process, which of course takes us back to 2003 at Maputo, where African countries committed that they would need to invest at least 10% of national budgets to agriculture, as well as, in that way, they would achieve a minimum of 6% annual growth rate of the agriculture sector. And also the third commitment was to end hunger by 2025 and have poverty within the same period, and boost intra-regional trade in agriculture commodities by 3 times to, the base that was in 2014. And more importantly, to enhance resilience to climate change and other shocks, and to strengthen mutual accountability to actions and results. Now, we've had 2 biennial review reports since then. One was for the period ending 2017, and we had one for the period ending 2019, which was released early 2020. So how have we performed on these commitments? And to note, of course, that these commitments are very much related systems and how we perform in terms of food and nutrition security. On the first commitment, out of a total of 49 countries that reported, only 2 countries were on track to achieving the commitments on CAADP processes and the growth that was promised. 2 out of 49. So, and on investment, none of the countries, at least in 2019, was on track. Ending hunger, which is a critical part of the food system's commitment, only 1 out of 49 countries was supposedly on track. Having poverty, we did slightly better, 9 out of 49, and trade was probably the best performing area. Resilience to climate change and other shocks, 11 countries. I'm not sure where we would stand when we factor in the the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course came after this report had been completed. And of course, on the mutual accountability and reporting, only 10 countries were on track. So this is a dire picture that we were painting. And of course, Africa had made a promise, which was 5 years ahead of the SDG, global targets. So this just summarizes our performance on the ending hunger. You can see that in the first biennial report, the picture was reasonably better. We had quite a few green countries doing well, but we lost traction. And in 2019, the picture got, quite red, meaning that we were really not doing too well. Similarly, for our performance on resilience to climate change and other shocks, which of course are some of the major issues that we need to tackle to remain on course. The situation got slightly better on that with a few greens, but you note that it hasn't really changed a great deal. We had a few, good cases in East Africa, maybe 4 or so countries. Otherwise, the rest of the East and Southern Africa region is in dire straits. So when we look at the overall average performance on all 7 commitments, Eastern Africa, not on track. Southern Africa, similarly, although we have a few countries that may have done well on 1 or 2 commitments, overall as regions, we are basically not on track. So we certainly have, serious challenges to be contending with. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our panelists, our discussants, to really try to unpack this for us. I'm going to start with Ms. Amos Zaindi, who is the CARE International Malawi Country Director. So if you are ready to come on board, I've got a specific range of questions that I would like to pose. So Amos, welcome to our dialogue, and we're happy that CARE International is one of our partners, and we've been doing a lot of good work together. I would like to ask Amos, how is CARE contributing to development of a resilient and sustainable food system? I've given you the dire picture, the negative side. I'm looking forward to getting some solutions, which is what Dr. Agnes Kalibata actually asked us to do, to come up with solutions. You have 5 minutes. I'm going to switch off my video, and when it comes back on, it means you should be concluding. Thank you. Please go ahead, Amos.
Thank you, Prof. And thanks everyone. Quite an interesting question. I'll start from the angle at which CARE is looking at this whole issue around food systems. We are advocating for inclusive and diverse food systems that contribute to the elimination of poverty, food and nutrition insecurity, by creating jobs. We need to raise the incomes across food value chains, but also we have to protect and enhancing cultural and social capital of our people and reduce the risks of the poorest and increasing the value distribution. These are the core issues that CARE is looking at specifically. We feel time has come for all of us to work together in enhancing interventions that strengthen, yes, of course, resilience of our population to different shocks. There are a number of initiatives that are happening, but we need to do more. We need to improve the ecosystems. We need to increase the productivity. We need to improve the post-harvest management. These are all things that we've talked about, but there's more that we need to do. We need to make our markets work, especially for our farmers. Can we look at the farm gate prices? Are our farmers getting value for their produce? I'll give you an example in Malawi, for instance. You farmers that will produce 1 crop in abundance this year, but because the prices are low, next season, there will be almost 0. So we need to ensure that we also improve access into the rural communities where most of these foods are produced. Can we access these areas? Can we take the produce to the markets without difficulty? The issue of value addition, but also look at distribution channels. In addition to that, within CARE, we also believe that we need to strengthen the capacities, skills, and confidence of our women, youth, and the indigenous peoples in food systems, so that collectively they can challenge the social norms that we have, but also we can increase the ownership and control of resources and assets and increase access to markets. I've already talked about the issue of markets, and also the services that will help our farmers to get the best out of what they're producing. We also need to strengthen the voice to promote equitable power relations in households and communities. This is very key, especially in the African context. Who makes a decision what to grow, how to use what has been produced, and how to manage that? Number three, I feel we also need to adopt transdisciplinary, inclusive and rights-based approaches. That should ensure integrated, participatory rights-based approaches to governance, as well as policy making at all levels, in order for us to address the structural inequities and power imbalances within the food systems. In Africa, these are the real issues that Africa is struggling with. So we need to have practical interventions that are dealing with these issues. We've been talking for quite some time within conferences and all that, but I believe time has come for us to take the action. Number four, there is need for us to have policies that place gender justice at the center of transformative change and increase investments in understanding, implementing, and strengthening equitable livelihoods in food systems. We also need to recognize and account for all environmental, social, and health impacts and externalities of food system policies, as well as practices, to account for the true value of agricultural goods, protect, restore, and manage our ecosystems. In my opening statement, I talked about the need for us to restore and protect the ecosystems. But also we need to ensure that the food systems transformations address the climate risks and vulnerabilities, especially focusing on the needs of the most vulnerable communities. Our target should be the most vulnerable communities. In all this, we need to ensure that we don't leave out the issue of knowledge and knowledge management. Therefore, we need to also increase knowledge about what? About issues of nutrition by supporting nutrition-specific approaches that directly affect the nutrition of our women, our children, but also promote and support dietary diversity. But also we need to place nutrition at the center of preventing illness and disease, because we need our health people if we are to move this agenda forward. On the part of policy, allow me to share one or two things. We have to ensure that all policies are guaranteeing food systems for workers that also have the right to decent, just, and safe work, because there are people that are involved in these processes. So we have to ensure that the policies that we create have and guarantee a conducive working environment for our people. But also they must focus on ensuring that youth, women, as well as our marginalized communities are protected from what I call predatory labor practices. We've seen them, we've seen farms producing, but how are they producing whatever they're producing? Are the people working in these farms given support? And finally, it's an issue of technology. It's an issue of technology. Previous speakers have talked about innovation, increasing agricultural research and technology. Therefore, we need to increase accessibility to quality technology and data for all participants in the food value, in the food value chain, but also ensure technological advances are inclusive of the needs of the marginalized users. We don't need technology that's for the sake of technology. We need technology that has got meaning. Let me stop there, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amos. That's quite a comprehensive list of things there that we need to do, and quite impressive. A lot of it coming through policy interventions. So yeah, this is really like peeling an onion. So we're going to carry on, and just to advise the rest of the participants, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box, and later on we'll be able to also take questions from the floor during the Q&A. Let me invite Andre Van Rijn, who is going to give us a perspective from the International Crops Research Institute, representing the CG system as one of our partners, but also to give us a different flair there. I've got a couple of questions I'd like to pose to Andre, so that to kind of like guide his response to what is really a mammoth task, also linking into what Amos has just shared with us. So Andre, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
There's a lot of talk about resilient food systems and sustainable, food supply. Now, these are terms which for a lot of people might sound like jargon. Would you like to please break this down for us and give us our marching orders as to how we can bring, this about? In other words, resilient food systems as well as resilient food supply. And also tied in with this question, if you can take note of this, how should research contribute to addressing these challenges? And I would say opportunities as well, because normally we just focus on challenges, but I believe that there may be opportunities to current food system issues and also in designing a better future. So tell us, what kind of research? How should we conduct this research? So there are two things. I want you to sort of unpack the issues about resilient food systems and supply. If you can put it in a sort of layman's term, that for some of our colleagues here who may not be technocrats can actually grasp, but also to then tell us how we should conduct in delivering solutions through research. What kind of research, and also how should this research be conducted? Please go ahead, Andre.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at this prestigious forum. So I will try to break it down as you asked, what resilience really means and how we can achieve it in layman's terms. And yes, we are dealing with extremely complex systems, and in complex systems jargon, we always say it may be complex, but it's not complicated. So let me try and break down what resilience really constitutes. And there are essentially four main pillars in which we can try to unpack resilience. And the first one is our capacity and our willingness to change. We as humans often are very, very averse to changing the way we are doing things in. So one of the basic cornerstones of resilience is that we have to be willing to change the way we're doing things, because you can't make it better if you don't change. And when I talk about change, I don't always mean just small linear incremental changes to make things better. Quite often we need to be very bold and make complete transformative changes. So let's keep that in the back of our minds. We have to be willing and we have to have the capacity to change. The next thing that the previous speaker, Amos, also touched on is the diversity of food systems. And to get food systems more diverse or more resilient, we have to make them more diverse. If we want to increase the nutritional value of the food we're eating, we have to increase the diversity. We as Africans really, really enjoy sadza or mpupu or pap or whatever we want to call it, ugali, but that is not a resilient diet. It is not the kind of diet that's going to get us through COVID and other catastrophes. So one of the other cornerstones of resilience is to broaden the diversity of what we produce, what we sell, what we eat, because within diversity, we will get resilience. The third thing about resilience that is paramount is the knowledge base, and we've heard that already a few times today, is how do we get and develop the knowledge that we need to manage this new diverse kind of diets or the transformations that we want to go through. But it's not only knowledge in itself, it's also integrating different types of knowledge. Knowledge about productions, knowledge about markets, knowledge about risk, knowledge about food systems, knowledge about education. How do we bring these things together? So the integration of knowledge is paramount. And then the fourth thing that is critical to contribute to resilience is the capacity to organize ourselves and to reorganize in response to change. We've all gone through a major reorganization and self-organization in the last year during COVID. So it's something that is very fresh in our minds, is that if we want to change, we want to increase diversity, we need to increase the integration of knowledge. That means that we also need to be able to self-organize ourselves around new food systems. And what does this new norm mean to us? How do we reduce the risk? How do we organize value chains around the new way, the new norms that we are engaging in now? And when I talk about self-organization, I also talk about that as a good African, I fully support the idea that we have to take responsibility for our own destiny. And how do we self-organize within Africa? We saw you spoke about internal trade in Africa. How do we improve that trade? How do we organize ourselves that our governments are able and willing to invest 10% of the country's investment into agriculture? And so that package of 4 components may sound a little bit woolly, but if you think about it, those are the essential components that we need to engage in and to work on to bring about resilient systems. So let me go very quickly to the second part of your question around how do we do it? And, you know, so often we look at the problems of systems, and I would rather us focus on what are the opportunities. And if I look at Africa, and I look at what's happening in the rest of the world, we have massive rates of obesity in the first world. We've seen what happened in France and in Italy with regards to COVID. People are not resilient. Yes, they can live to very old ages because they have got good health systems, but inherently, the food systems has failed us. We don't have enough diversity. So we are not resilient enough. And I think in Africa, if we look at not the problems of what the food systems that we are working on, but where are we? Our production systems are still primarily farmer or family based. They're still very much integrated crop livestock systems. We are not farming with monospecific wall-to-wall of only one species. Our farmers have got a range of species that they are farming. They're integrating it with livestock. Our systems is pretty much still hands-on. We do not have the high level of industrialized systems that we see in the first world that create massive environmental and social problems, and as we've seen in during COVID and health problems. So I think we come from a very strong base in Africa that we should not try to focus on what the first world is doing, but to do our own thing, to organize ourselves in Africa so that we develop a food system that is appropriate for African conditions, for what we as Africans want, and not necessarily focusing on what we think the first world is. The first world is not the goal, it's not the target. We see that the first world is struggling. So what can we and research and industry and private sector and governance do to put Africa on a trajectory towards food systems? And in my mind, those should be circular food systems that will contribute and help us to a new food system. I'll stop there for now. I can get very excited about this stuff, Prof. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andre. Some very, interesting points there. I like the way you unpacked the, all the issues to do with the food systems here, and also, complex but not complicated. So I think that's the name of the game. We need to simplify things, but that's not to say that we are trivializing what is a very complex, system. And the focus on opportunities. I like that, because, you know, in a lot of cases, as scholars, we've tended to think that, you know, our development path is going to go along the same path as what we've seen in the West particularly, but it need not be so, because hopefully we can learn from, you know, the challenges that the West and the North have faced, and take a different route. So with that in mind, let me move on to, I don't know, Ms. Chimbala, are you, I noticed earlier you were having challenges. Are you in a position to come on board now? Let me know.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm here,
Now,
thank you.
thanks very much, Chimbala. Ms. Chimbala, of course, is representing Chimbala Yoyo. She's a program officer with Oxfam Southern Africa, a valued partner of FANAPAN. We've been doing some interesting work in the recent past. Now, we know that Oxfam has been working in you know, market systems, especially for smallholders. How do you see your work fitting into, you know, the issues that we're discussing here? Complex, but yeah, not complicated food systems. Andre talked about the issues of capacity and willingness to change, and also the fact that we need diverse food systems, and of course, how to manage our knowledge and integrate all these things and put them in a way that we can deliver better on you know, for, especially for, you know, smallholder farming households, but also even the poor, you know, urban poor, who have to depend, yeah, on minimum sort of income to be able to, you know, conjure up a balanced diet. So if you can come through and tell us how Oxfam is playing its role in this, and how markets, especially the role of markets in addressing issues that our food system is facing in Africa. Please, Ms. Chimbala, if you can go ahead. You have 5 minutes. I'll come back on my video when you're getting close to the end. Thank you. Please go ahead.
No, thank you very much, Prof. Oxfam the past few years has been doing very good work in creating markets that work for smallholder farmers. And we have created models that showcase how these markets should look like, pro-poor markets for smallholder farmers, especially women. However, for interventions to be sustainable, including all the other livelihood solutions that my fellow panelists have spoken of, how we can be more resilient, how can food systems be more food secure, a lot of governments and donors and civil society organizations have invested millions and millions of dollars into strengthening food systems and programs for smallholder farmers. But smallholder farmers being pulled out of poverty, we still see a lot of inequality and injustice when it comes to food systems and access to food. So as Oxfam, we have engaged in advocacy and influencing, creating a policy environment where smallholder farmers can thrive, where smallholder farmers can hold government accountable, decision makers, to how these programs or policies are performing. So how Oxfam has been working, we want to domesticate global policies such as the SDGs, regional ones, Agenda 64, CADIP, unpack how the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is going to affect smallholder farmers, rural communities, what opportunities lie in there. So we launched a markets campaign project with FANAPAN a few months ago. And in there, after creating awareness on the challenges and recommendations on how we want these systems to be strengthened, because market access is a prerequisite to working food systems, agriculture, diversity, food diversity and nutrition. We want to capacitate the communities, capacitate, transfer knowledge on how these continental and global policies mean to them as a community. How are their countries implementing or domesticating them? In Zambia, we do have policies that speak to and are aligned to the CADIP. We have our Agriculture National Investment Plan and Policy. Last year, our government allocated 6.7, that's in Zambia, 6.7 of the national budget to agriculture. But does this really translate into pulling people out of poverty? Does this really translate into agriculture investment? So for us to change food systems as Oxfam, we feel that the system should change, the environment should be enabling, and the people to make this environment work for them are the communities. So we are now going to be engaging in a series of capacity building for smallholder farmers to be more inclusive in the way these policies are developed. The national plan in Zambia ended last year, so this year there'll be a new one. There's a new one. So how is it performing? And as countries approach to develop their national budgets as the year progresses, smallholder farmers at the table to say we want gendered budgets that are going to now fit into our communities' rural roles. Are they going to be constructed? Why haven't they been constructed? The policy says this, and this is what the government has delivered. So going to the grassroots level and making sure that they understand and that knowledge is disseminated. When you talk about constraints with research and development, extension services, information, all that is agriculture investment. The lack of agriculture investment, public investment, but then also private investment. What environment have governments created for the private sector to supply services to smallholder farmers like information, finance, credit? So to sum up, Prof, what Oxfam envisions, what it has been doing is to capacitate smallholder farmers to know and understand policies so that they can advocate for more inclusive policies that speak to their needs, which is to increase agriculture investment so that they can have infrastructure, information, capacity built, they can have capital. So that's how, as Oxfam, we're looking at a holistic approach.
Thank you, Chimbala. Thank you very much. I was just trying to keep track of all this. So essentially what I'm hearing here is not just to give a voice to this family, but also to give them the capacity to enforce that voice. So we want to see the smallholder farmers having capacity to really actively participate in policy processes, from policy formulation, implementation, but also evaluation and holding the policymakers and implementers accountable to the promises that they make. But ultimately, it's actually giving power to, I don't know whether people give anyone power, but maybe to help the smallholder farmers and the vulnerable groups to grab the power to have change take place. Thank you very much for that. So we're moving on. I'm going to ask my colleague here, Dr. Baitsi Podisi, to get ready. Dr. Podisi is with the Center for Coordination of Agricultural Research in Southern Africa, that is CADESA, one of our partners. Now, Dr. Podisi, we are currently in the middle of two major shocks, because we keep talking about, shocks to the system. We have two major shocks right now. One that I would consider as acute, that is COVID-19, in the sense that it's acute, starting from, just over a year ago, we're still in the middle of it. Normally, you'd expect an acute condition to last maybe a short while. We're not sure how long this is going to be with us. Now, And we also have another shock, which I would consider in terms of comparison, although some people may not agree, is somewhat chronic, that is climate change. Although we may actually experience some acute impacts from what is a chronic kind of condition. Once in a while, it flares up in form of extreme weather events, like what we've had in the region, cyclones, we've had droughts. So you're moving from one extreme to the other. In one case, you have floods coming out of cyclones with devastating impact, but you also have droughts that are, of course, affecting productivity and production of agriculture, commodities, which we need to support our food system. So how can the East and Southern Africa region and Africa in general prepare and recover from instability that is caused by these shocks and ensure that the food system will continue to deliver? I think we saw some examples of what could happen to food systems with the restrictions that governments imposed to make sure that the COVID-19 virus or infections do not spread, just as an example. But people have actually said, you can almost rest assured that COVID-19 is not the last of the pandemics we're going to face. As the world, sort of is teetering on an edge in terms of our relationship, how we relate to our environment. We can expect more of these shocks. We can expect more frequent weather, extreme weather events. So tell me something here. How do we make sure that Africa will continue to deliver on its food system, considering we're already failing, at least up to now? We're not doing that well. I know that's a massive question. So let's see how you're going to tackle that.
Thank you very much, Prof, for a very good question. Indeed, a very challenging one in that respect, that as you've rightly mentioned, that currently we are reeling under those two major shocks, being the COVID-19, a recent one, and the chronic one of climate change. And just to let you know that the issue of climate change in particular has long been recognized globally as an issue for concern. And for us in the region, CADESA, as a regional body created to coordinate regional efforts in terms of addressing research and development issues, has prioritized the need for us to intervene in this area because we can clearly see its impact in agriculture, particularly so also because of the majority of our farmers who are smallholders, and generally they tend to be resource challenged, and this makes them even more vulnerable because they lack the resources to respond to such disruptions. And because of such knowledge, we are thinking, as CADESA, we realize that there is usually very valuable lessons that can be drawn from the past in terms of how we respond to this, that we can use those lessons in terms of helping our systems to bounce back, to help our farmers to get back on their feet. And within the region, there are some useful lessons from various partners that are involved in issues of disaster management, not only agricultural production per se, that there are important lessons that we draw from that, and we try to use those as a basis for learning and sharing that across the region, which can be taken up even by member states. As you know, they say a regional vulnerability assessment, which is normally done on a regional basis, and this is used to inform the relevant ministers to do with agriculture and food security, for example. And beyond that, we know that there are other tools that can be put to use in the area of foresight, that is trying to use information based on happenings that are taking place now to sort of think about the future and say how can we best plan for these things when they happen. CADESA has been working with various partners, CG centers in this area of developing capacity for foresight, that is to try to sort of predict and model some of the likely scenarios that might take place given what is happening in within our region. We are aware of the huge demand for food. At the same time, there are these disruptions that arise due to these triggers, these disruptors. It could be climate change, it could be cyclones, or some disease outbreaks, pests and diseases, locusts, as you've seen. But based on these tools, we are able to use this to strategize better, not only as a country, but as a region. And fortunately, within our region, as CADESA, we've been trying to work together as countries to share information, and therefore we need to invest more in early warning systems. Currently, this is an issue that CADESA is working with the CG centers and other development partners to try to build capacity in these areas such that we can be able to utilize this data, the big data that we are gathering on various environmental parameters, which can help us in time to anticipate and even formulate interventions moving into the future. And there are also responsive programs which have been utilized in the past to respond, say, after droughts in some of the regional countries, where based on information that is collected from these vulnerability assessments, which are done annually, depending on the region of the country that is affected, and allow countries to kick into place the disaster response mechanisms, not only at national level, but sometimes even at regional level, where there are anticipated deficits. This thing is escalated to other countries or regions that can be able to help. So this phenomenon, which often goes beyond our borders, cannot be done sometimes by an individual. This calls for cooperation, hence agencies like us that have been put in place so that we can rally the troops, the key stakeholders, whether it's the farmers, the political leadership, and the NGO sector, who have valuable experience, especially in cases of disaster in terms of distributing aid to the affected groups. And we also try to do a lot of capacity building on understanding the issues such that we can be able to deploy evidence-based policies or evidence-based interventions. These are the things that we've been trying to inculcate with our stakeholders. And of course, the issue of advocacy, working with like-minded entities such as the FANAPAN and other actors who are able to bring these issues to the fore for the relevant stakeholders to get around the table and really discuss, because this issue of the food systems is very complex, and therefore interventions cannot be done by one. It needs cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Potise. Thanks very much. The key message there is lessons from the past that we can bring to bear on our problems. And yeah, I like the idea of the foresight and scenario modeling, which obviously helps us to not only save resources, but also avoid expensive experimentation with people's lives. So if we can do this from simulations and modeling, that will be great. So yeah, we are nowhere near completely unpacking this complex issue, but I hope that we can come up with uncomplicated answers. So we have one more partner here that is going to give us her point of view. That's Dr. Annie Wesley, who is a Senior Program Officer at the International Development Research Center. And of course, IDRC is a long-term partner of FANAPAN as well. Now, I've been listening to all these deliveries, and yeah, while Andre says it's complex but not complicated, and he tried to explain or to simplify this complication, I'm not sure that I'm really out of the woods as yet. Now, yeah, we're using these big words here: food system, sustainable food supply. Now, however, at an individual level, as an individual, it still boils down to how I can ensure that me and my family receive adequate, safe, and healthy food. So that's the most critical thing. So we can talk of systems and all these things, but ultimately, we're talking of an individual that needs to be properly fed, make sure that the food they're eating is safe and it's also healthy, and it can give them all the nutrients that they need to be able to lead an active and healthy life. So what is it that we need to do, and how do we do this? Really simplifying it to what a food system should deliver to an individual. Yes, we know there are complex systems out there, but how do we bring this down to you and me? And even when you're talking of a small family household or an urban sort of family who are struggling to make sure that their family is well fed. So I don't know if I'm being fair here, but I'm just trying to bring this reality to what I consider as the ultimate, function of a food system. Welcome, Annie. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Simba, and good afternoon, everyone. Also, thanks to the organizers for extending an invitation for International Development Research Center and myself to participate in this important dialogue. The question posed is very important. It all comes back to individual, the food we eat, whether we're getting it for being healthy and nutritious diets in a way that we can be productive members of the society, raising our families, our children, and contributing whatever we can, and living a healthy, productive life. That's the end goal. And it's also great to listen to the excellent presentations so far in this session, where a number of key points that I would also summarize leading towards the individual interest about the food system and nutrition have been covered. And some of the remarks I will be making on behalf of IDRC and personally would reinforce several points that have been made. And I would put my intervention in a three-pronged approach. First, how to better generate and improve technical and social innovations, as we are calling game-changing solutions that promote equitable access to nutritious and healthy diets at an individual level. Here, I would like to emphasize about the nutritious and healthy diets part of what I just said. While, as we know, there's no doubt we need a sustainable food supply to feed the growing African population, we also, as Professor Simba mentioned, want us all to be healthy and well-nourished. In this context, the concern many of us are also having is the continued undernutrition in the continent, including micronutrient deficiencies, especially among women and children on one side, combined with an alarming increase of overweight and obesity. Unfortunately, this scenario of double and triple burden of malnutrition at individual level is rapidly creeping into Africa, where traditionally, as you know, we have been grappling how to fight severe forms of undernutrition, such as stunting and wasting. So even as we were making progress towards the nutrition-related development goals, to complicate this, the current pandemic further exposed the vulnerabilities and fragilities within the food system. And coming to the individual level again, as a nutritionist, I am particularly biased towards not forgetting about nutrition and One Health considerations as we strive to transform food systems. My bias also makes sense because we know that every $1 investment in nutrition has a potential return of $16 in terms of benefits. Fortunately, we already have considerable knowledge and solutions in this area, and we need to find ways to adapt and adjust to the local context in a way that it really makes a difference in the individual level. And in addition to that, as already mentioned, we recognize that the climate change related risks requires urgent action across the entire food system. That brings to my second point about adapting to climate change. And already other speakers mentioned, it's important because the climate change increases inequalities throughout the food production, availability of food, as well as diet quality, and therefore nutrition and health. So action to improve food systems, integrating climate-related resilience and adaptability of course, requires multidisciplinary research and collaborations among all the actors in the complex food system operations. And this should be done, as you know, in a way that directly benefits the community at individual level, especially women and girls who bear disproportionate responsibility within the food system in terms of the workloads. But fortunately, there's also a good thing that they have the capacity and the power to transform them. And that brings me to the third and final point, is about scaling innovations. As we are finding solutions, unless we scale them to reach the broader community, it would be difficult to reap the benefits in a quick and efficient way that we need. So how do we do this? Again, it comes back to working together seems to be the only way to bring innovations to scale and empower marginalized farmers, including women farmers, to ensure equitable access to nutritious food. So I'm pleased that these dialogues, such as today, are bringing together stakeholders, researchers, and practitioners who are committed to a long-term view to find solutions and develop tools that respond to different local contexts. For example, from IDRC, I'm pleased that we're collaborating with FANOPAN and ILRI towards an easy-to-use tool to collect dietary and health data by household level, at an individual level, and family level. More broadly, IDRC's new strategy 2030 recently made a lot by supporting research investments in food systems that will lead to co-benefits in health, nutrition, and equity for communities facing high levels of climate change risk. We are implementing this through our program on climate resilient food systems. And I'm glad that the timely light that is shining on the relevance of food system through the Food System Summit activities also reinforces IDRC's long-term vision, food systems, as a way of achieving several goals of SDGs. So thank you for the opportunity to join this important dialogue and wish everyone all the best. Thank you, Professor Simba.
Thank you very much, Annie. Thank you. Yes, the issue of equitable access to nutritious and healthy diets. I think this echoes, the reports recently where, yes, we can talk about diversity of food supply, but really the bottom line is, can I afford it? And essentially what has been coming out is that a lot of households are actually not able to afford a good diet. Even if the food may be available in the market, they just don't have the wherewithal to economically access that food. So that still remains a challenge. And yes, of course, we know that there's a great return on investment. For every dollar invested, $16 return. So you would think that it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is a much greater return than most places you can invest in. Even the stock market would struggle to get that kind of return. And yet we don't see our governments particularly putting that kind of money or into investing in nutrition and food systems. And so the challenges are still there. I also like the idea of working to scale. Yes, we can come up with all these solutions and propose things that could address our challenges in food systems. But we need to be able to do this at scale, because this is a massive challenge. It needs us to do this at scale, which means that our policy interventions are actually critical, because You can do little experiments, but to really deliver at scale, you definitely need the policy environment to be on your side. So thank you very much, Dr. Annie, for that. So we've heard from, yes, from our discussants. So now we've got a bit of time that we can move into, question and answer time. I think we have about 10 minutes or so. There have been a number of questions posed on the chat, and I've seen responses to some of the questions. I think one of the questions that I saw was from Prof. Kinabo, a colleague and partner as well from Sokoine. The issue of, she says, we've defined food and nutrition security from the global level all the way to individuals. So we all know what that means. But do we understand the same, do we have a common understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking food systems? I know that Andre tried to define that, but does anybody want to have a go at that? How do we define food systems from global to individual level? That's quite a question, isn't it? Does anyone of our panelists want to take on that? Because we've been using these terms. I know I asked Andre to kind of unpack it, but we have a common understanding. So it would mean that it's one of the things we need to do to speak the same language so that everybody understands this to be the, what we're talking about. If we use the definition from the FAO and others, it talks of food systems being all processes and actors that are involved in getting the food from production, down the food or the value chain up to a point where we are as individuals ready to consume this food. So it means that it involves a lot of players, not just primary production, but we're also talking of distribution, we're talking of processing, we're talking of the retail and wholesale, and your local food markets. So all these are players that have something to do with the food system. And if we're talking food system, it means that we need all these people to be involved in delivering solutions. So that's a critical point to note there when we're talking food systems. Do we have any other sort of burning question from the floor? Please just indicate. I hope there is a reaction to show that your hand is up. We can take maybe a couple of questions, maybe 3 in a row before we ask our panelists to respond. And if you can direct your question to a specific person if necessary, otherwise if it's general, we'll try and field the question to whoever volunteers to respond to it. Do we have any specific questions? I'm just trying to check the chat here for some specific comments while I'm waiting for responses. Please feel free. This is you to have your say. Kanto, if you can help, if you see any reactions that I'm not able to see here.
Yes, Prof, I will assist.
Or is it that all the questions have been answered via the chat? Or should I maybe ask Prof. Kinabo to just comment on this food system definition issue, if there are any other points you may want to add? Sorry to pick on you, Prof. Okay, we don't seem to have any takers there. Let me go back to my panelists. And with the 5 minutes that we have left, if you can just give us sort of like a parting, short take-home point. We've covered, of course, a wide range of issues here. So maybe I'll just start in the opposite direction, starting off with Dr. Annie, who came last, if you can be first, to just give us a parting sort of remarks. Yeah, 1 minute at the most.
Yeah, overall, my reaction is I feel very optimistic that we are talking about the relevance of food system in the context of several things that are touching upon the SDGs that we are trying to achieve. So there's a connection to food production, poverty, climate change, coming together as partnerships, research, development, nutrition. And I'm also pleased that as part of these dialogues, we are voicing all the need to come together and find solutions. There may be a lot of solutions already available. Coming together makes us talk to each other and helps us to bring the solutions together so that it's much more widespread. That way, my overall reaction to this the important way these dialogues are positioned leading up to the Food System Summit, but also trying to address the bigger issues of sustainable development goals as food systems as an entry point makes me feel very positive that we're moving in the right direction in spite of all the other unexpected issues coming along the way, like the pandemic, and which might be putting us a little bit back, but all of us coming together seems to be one right step towards it. And hopefully we'll continue these dialogues even after this summit, but it's only a beginning that we are talking to each other and going to work together much more efficiently, reaching the most vulnerable in a way the solutions reach the right people at the right time in a right way. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. So yes, so the point that we're talking to each other is a good start, and we need to continue to do that. Let me ask, Dr. Podise, any parting shots as we come to the close of this part of this session?
Yes, thank you, Prof. As a parting shot in relation to coming from the point of the significance, particularly of a trigger or a disruptor such as climate change, as an important factor that we need to take into consideration in our interventions. Just to highlight, to indicate that food systems are complex, as we've already heard, and they are influenced by a number of interacting factors, such as climate change. Therefore, improving the systems requires collaborative effort. Therefore, cooperation at all levels is indispensable. As such, we need to deploy all the arsenal of tools that we have at our disposal based on what is happening now to try to strategize to see how we can react to these triggers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Podise. Chimbala, any parting shots? What would you like to share with the audience just as a take-home point?
Thanks, Prof. A very interesting discussion. Learned a lot about food systems today. So for me, take home short, we can say as much on what we should do. But in terms of sustainability and transformation, I think it's very important that the environment in which we want the private sector and the public sector to prioritize climate change intervention, gender, capital investment, the environment in which they are in should be conducive. Yeah. And so we need to create that environment that is more inclusive of community voices so that change is sustainable and change that is heard. Consumers, especially smallholder farmers, they participate about 66% in the food system in agriculture, but then they get 10% of that value. And so they are the ones who are participating the most, getting the least. And the food system is then controlled by the minority, which are the big corporates and all that. And so we need to demand, if we want to produce nutritious food, which is indigenous to our environment, indigenous to our communities, such as seas and the like. Oxfam has a number of models that they are implementing when it comes to food diversity, responding to climate.
I'm going to stop you there. So it's about equity. I think that's the most critical point that you are bringing on board. I'm sorry to have to cut you because we almost eating into the next session's time, but thank you for that. Andre, parting shot, I think the time gets less and less as we go to the end. My apologies for that. Do you have anything to say, Andre, just as we conclude?
I'll be very brief, Prof. Thank you very much. In the chat, we were also talking about rights-based approaches, and I think it's a very, very key point it's important for me that I think the right to healthy food is paramount. And then a very brief other point is I would love to see in the chat box as we go along, who of the people on this call really believe that Africa should carve out their own food systems, in particular circular food systems, because I think that is something that we can really take forward. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andre. And to close this part of the session, I will hear from Amos. Just your parting shot.
Thank you very much, Prof. and everyone. Very quickly, let us take action. I think this is a time for us to action that is targeted at the right place where action happens. In this case, we're looking at the farmer. And we are saying, let us invest in our women, let us invest in our youth. They are the future in all what we are talking about. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Amos. Thank you. Let me thank all the panelists that participated in this session. Thank you very much for your time and for your insightful comments and knowledge that you shared with everyone. I know that we were discussing the issue of definition of what a food system is. I think that was offered, it's on the chat by Carl Jering, who is, I think, with GIZ, so the regional office. So I think, yeah, that would be a worthwhile thing to look at on the chart there. Thanks so much to everyone, to the participants. I am informed before I hand over to the director of our dialogue that we need a group picture. Kanto, are we ready for that? And if you can give instructions on how this should be done.
Yes, Prof, thank you. So I will ask everyone to open their camera and show their best smile. It's gonna take a little bit long, like 3 seconds, 5 seconds. And yeah, so please everyone, open your videos and show your good looking, nice smile while I'm taking picture. Thank you, everyone. Okay, one last one. Thank you. Thank you. And last one. Thanks. Thank you, Prof. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kanto. Thanks to everyone for this past session. I would like now to hand over to the program director to tell us what to do next.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof, for the facilitation, very engaging, and a lot of issues were unpacked. We have a complex system that is not complicated, and we need to come up with uncomplicated solutions. Thank you very much also to the all our discussants. for enlightening discussions. Now, we will have breakout sessions, and this will take about 40 minutes. So we will be directed into groups. There is French and Portuguese translators. And so, or if you are speaking French or Portuguese, you can go to the right group for you. So for French and Portuguese group, you will have your own respective groups. So you don't need to go to the English ones. And I think this will be, I think maybe Kanto can actually come in and tell us about these groups, further information about the groups. You can select the breakout room for the 4 square icon and click join on your group. So if you just, if you can see the icon on your right-hand side down there of your screen, you can then join the breakout room you would like to join.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Everyone, so if you haven't received an invitation to go or join a group, which means you are remaining on the plenary. So the plenary are those who are English and Portuguese. They will have translation on the plenary. So if you have received the invitation, please join your group. So the plenary, it's the group one, which is facilitated by Mr. Francis Halle and Mr. Wundwusen Tefer. So we're going to give a little bit of minutes for everyone to join their respective group. So for the French and Portuguese, remain on the plenary.
Hello, Kanto.
Hello.
I am in the right group, right?
Yes, yes, Francis, you are in the plenary. You are facilitating the group one.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Oh, sorry, Kanto. I was in group 4 with Julie Collins, who's supposed to be the facilitator there, I think, and she's supposed to be with the French group. So, because there's no interpretation in the group.
Okay, so can I switch Julia Collins and Francis then?
Yes, I think that will work.
Okay, or Shiluva will remain and yeah, okay. Thank you, Tembi. All right.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes, hello?
Hello, so where am I going now?
No, you remain on the plenary.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, yes, because you translate, because our French friends are staying on the plenary. Yes.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello. Sorry.
Hello,
Francis.
Hi, Miguel.
I would like to know for Portuguese speakers, which group should we enter? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. You remain on this group and you remain on this plenary. The Portuguese translator is here with us as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, all right, thank you. So Francis, I'm going to ask you to join group 4.
I will see the prompt, right?
Yes, yes.
Hi, I'm the rapporteur, so I will remain here, right? I'm on the
Yes, yes, you remain here.
Thank you. All right.
All right, so we are waiting for Julia. If Julia is here, then we can start our session. Francis, have you received your invitation?
Hi, I'm looking Julie at group 4 still.
Yes, I have asked her to join this group. She's coming soon.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes.
Hello, Tembi, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Julie.
Hi. So is this the session that I'm supposed to be in and facilitating?
Yes, this is the correct session. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And the breakout room where I was a moment ago, Shaluva is still there, I think. She's the rapporteur. Are the participants in that session also being invited to join the main session again?
No, they are remaining there, and Shilova is remaining there. I think Wood Wilson is going to be the one who's going to do the rapporteuring here now. So Farah, confirm?
Yes, I confirm I am here. Yeah.
All right, yeah, thanks.
We can start. Thank you.
Okay. So let me just check, is there a facilitator for the people in?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Tembi.
Yes, Julie, we have just transferred Francis was in here to that group, so he will facilitate that session.
Okay, great, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that they weren't left alone.
Shaluva
is still there. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Tembi, and thank you, everybody. Why don't we get started? I'm Julie Collins. I'm going to be facilitating this breakout room, and I'm a senior associate scientist with Academia 2063. We have co-organized this dialogue along with FANERPAN, and we're very pleased, very happy that all of you have taken the time to attend today. We really appreciate it and are really enjoying hearing everybody's thoughts and looking forward to our discussion. So as some of our speakers mentioned earlier, the outcomes of this dialogue are going to directly feed into the planning of the UN Food Systems Summit. We're going to be producing an outcomes document at the end of this with all of the thoughts. And this breakout session is all of our opportunity to share our comments, our suggestions on the UN FSS and on the questions that they're going to be addressing. So we have quite a lot to get done in our short 40 minutes. Our main tasks are, I'm going to put them in the chat. We're going to deliberate on challenges and opportunities to transforming African food systems and ensuring that they're sustainable and resilient. Second, we will share best practices, lessons learned, innovations and policies for transforming food systems. Third, we will be identifying game-changing solutions, which can include best practices, evidence, frameworks, which are actionable, sustainable, and can have impact at scale in terms of building the resilience of food systems. And fourth, we will be discussing of high-level African champions who can advance the African perspective going into the Food Systems Summit and also the solutions that will come out of the summit. So again, that's deliberating on challenges and best practices, or challenges and opportunities, sharing best practices, identifying game-changing solutions. So there we'll be zeroing in on some of these best practices which are actionable and can have impact at scale. And then last, discussing the role of high-level African champions. And Wandwosen is going to be our rapporteur, who's going to record our thoughts and make sure that these contribute to the outcome document from this dialogue. So I, again, will be facilitating this group. And given that we have a lot to do in only 40 minutes, my role is going to be to make sure that we can address all of these 4 tasks that we have in front of us. And I would suggest that we devote just a little bit of time to the first one, since we've already discussed a lot of the challenges and opportunities in the discussions earlier, but we can do to it. And we have about 20 participants, so we don't have time for a round of introductions, unfortunately, But before you speak, if you could please introduce yourself and your organization, and also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like. So why don't we get started and just very briefly discuss some of what to us are the key challenges and opportunities to transforming African food systems and ensuring that they're sustainable and resilient. Is there anything that jumped out to any of you from the discussions today or from your previous work in terms of challenges and opportunities?
Prof. Simba raised his hand.
Thank you, Kanto. Prof. Simba, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Julie. Simba Spanda, I'm with FANAPAN's Nutrition Sensitive Agriculture program. I think one opportunity for me is that we have this gives us a chance to promote traditional African foods that have somewhat been neglected and which we know to be, one, resilient, but also they tend to be more nutritious as well. So I won't say too much. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sambanda. Absolutely. And that echoes a lot of our discussion also about diversity of food systems and about not necessarily following the same path as other regions and other countries, but finding a way to advance African food systems in our own way. Nima, I see a hand up from you.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Nima Lugangira. I'm a member of parliament from Tanzania. And what I wanted to touch on is that this whole idea of food systems gives us African countries an opportunity in terms of making sure how can we reduce the high malnutrition that most African countries are facing. For example, stunting for children under 5, anemia, obesity, whilst we produce a lot of food, but also our food systems are not strong enough because there's a lot of food wastage. And then on the other hand, we spend a lot of money importing food. So I think when we're going to be discussing the food systems, it gives an opportunity for us African countries to see how can we strengthen our food systems and not only focusing on urban food systems, but also urban and rural regions. For example, in Tanzania, the food basket regions, that is the regions that are producing about 70% of the food in Tanzania, are the same regions with the highest with the highest stunting rate. So it goes to show that whilst we're discussing the food system, we should look at the entire spectrum and make sure how can we also improve the nutrition status, improve the wastage, but also the quality of the food, and the things like the management of things like pesticides, the pesticide residue, the way in which things like fruits and vegetables are being sold in our food markets, and all of that. That was the brief contribution I wanted to make. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Nima. Yeah, very, very on point. You touched on a lot of challenges and opportunities both. There's so much growing food demand, which is leading to these high imports of food. And it's also an opportunity for local producers and local agribusiness firms if they can meet some of that demand. Why don't we?
Sorry, Julie, before you go ahead, just wanted to say our participant in French and Portuguese that you can speak your language. That's why we have the translation here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanto, for the reminder. And it's, I think, also a reminder to me and all of us to watch our speed, to speak a little bit at a moderate pace so that the translators will be able to interpret as they go along. Thank you, Kanto. I see a hand up from Liz. Liz, please go ahead, and probably after your comment, we'll move on to our next item. Go on, Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie. My name is Liz Ogutu. I work for Harvest Plus, and what we do is biofortification. So just in support to what Simba and Nima has said before, in terms of nutritious foods, I think biofortified crops, specific biofortified crops are now being consumed by 6.4 million households on the continent. And these are homegrown solutions using conventional breeding to increase the nutrients of staple foods. So I think it's a solution that's very easy to implement. It's just a matter of governments putting policies in place to make sure that the seeds are there and the grain is there and the food is available for Africans. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Liz. Absolutely. There's a lot of opportunities related to biofortification and related to other ways to increase the nutrient content of staple foods. And that is a nice segue, I think, into our item B, our second objective of this session, which is to share best practices, lessons learned, technological innovations, collaborations, and policies which can contribute to transforming food systems. So we've talked some about these opportunities. So what are some best practices and what are some lessons that we've learned in terms of increasing the resilience of food systems? I think we don't have any hands up now. Professor Sibanda, is that an old hand or a new hand that you have?
Well, I don't know whether the old hand is me, but the hand is new.
Okay.
Yeah, the one thing which I think is a simple enough thing to say, but not very easy to implement, is this whole issue about the importance of nutrition knowledge on food choices, especially under conditions of food scarcity. It's important that people know what foods to choose, and this knowledge not only among women or caregivers, but also to make sure that the men who, in a lot of cases, control the resources have knowledge of nutrition, because we've seen in some studies that this actually makes a difference to the nutrition status of women of reproductive age, as well as children that really need this food. Knowledgeable household head, in most cases, associated with improved nutrition outcomes. So we need to make sure that this is one of the interventions where we invest in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, very good point. Knowledge, not just of the person feeding the children, but of the household head or the person who's controlling the resources. I see a hand up from Nima also, and I think that's also a new hand. Go ahead, Nima.
Thank you, Julie. I wanted to share one of the best practices, which oftentimes when we're talking about food systems or changing the behavioral change, we tend to forget politicians through political parties. So one best practice is, I don't know how it is in other countries, but I know in Tanzania, whenever there's a general election and the party that wins the election, usually their election manifesto is what sets the framework for the next, if it's 5 years. So one best practice that we did here in Tanzania last year, an NGO that I'm the executive director, what we did was to try and make sure that the major political parties embedded nutrition and elements of food systems, and also putting the agricultural sector to be part and parcel of the transformation of food systems and improving nutrition, so that if that party wins the election, it then informs the different strategies that the government takes. Because, for example, here in Tanzania, issues of food safety, the dietary variety, trying out like the orange sweet potato, vitamin A, maize, etc. It was more being driven by the health sector, whereas the agricultural sector wasn't part and parcel of that discussion. But through the advocacy of the political parties, now the ruling party's election manifesto has put in those targets, like promoting nutritious, nutrient-rich crops in the agriculture sector, promoting, dairy milk, the consumption of milk in the livestock sector. So that can also be another strategy to see how can we bring in other stakeholders, not only experts, but also if it's political parties, religious leaders, and using the media. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a great comment and a really interesting best practice that others, I think, can learn from. I know we don't have much time for discussion today, but I encourage people to follow up with Nima after this event in order to learn more if you can apply some of what she did to your countries. And I see a hand from Liz also. Is this a legacy hand or is it a new hand from you, Liz?
No, it's a new hand, and it
Okay.
seems we're following each other
Yes.
one by one. Yes, I just wanted to commend the Tanzanian government for the work that they've done on policies, especially on the multi-sectoral work they're doing on nutrition. So what Nima says actually is physically what is there. I have seen it. I'm not Tanzanian, but I know that it actually works and it exists. The other thing that we have found that works very well is training parliamentarians and policymakers on nutritional programs. So when you get a new government, because there's obviously elections and things like that, there's an importance of training policymakers on what could be ways of improving the food systems in the country. And that's something that different players can participate in and make sure it's a multi-sectoral process that cuts across finance, budgeting, health, agriculture, education, and all the rest of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Another good best practice is certainly providing capacity strengthening at different levels, but certainly to politicians and members of parliament is really key since they are the decision makers. I'd like to shift, even though we've just talked a little bit about best practices, since our time is running out, I'd like to shift to our part C above, which is to identify game-changing solutions that could advance the resilience and sustainability of food systems. And the game-changing solutions that the UN Food Systems Summit organizers are looking for, these are solutions that are feasible, we can do them, they are sustainable, and they can be scaled up and really make a difference at scale. So maybe among the best practices that we've mentioned and among other ideas, which are the ones that we should really focus on, prioritize, elevate to the attention of the summit organizers as potential game-changing solutions? We're happy to hear more from our from Simba, Nima, and Liz, but also please, the other people who haven't had a chance to speak yet, please feel free to contribute your ideas.
Hi, Julie. Okay for me to go ahead?
Go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
While I was hoping we'd get other voices to come on board. But one of the areas I think governments especially have the power through the fiscus to make a difference in is in the area of, I think, intelligent use of subsidies. We've seen in a lot of cases governments using subsidies to support particularly maize, maybe cassava. These are your staples, which is great because they provide up to 70% of the calories. But this tends to crowd out all the other food types, because we're trying to create diversity. So would like to see more investment going into other crops, especially the ones we talked about, the neglected crops. Can we see support coming from the public sector to promote these crops as well? Thank you.
Oh, I don't know about the others, but I missed maybe the last 10 seconds of what you said, Professor Sibanda. You said that subsidies for staples tend to crowd out other food types. I didn't hear what you said following that.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thanks.
Yes. What I said was we need to see governments being in a position to use subsidies in a kind of like an intelligent way, where we don't put all subsidies on staples, which has been the case in the past, is they tend to crowd out the rest of the other food commodities that we know are more nutritious than maize, cassava, etc. So we'd like to see more investment into some of these cropping systems, as well as maybe small livestock, because we know that these are the ones that will make a difference to nutrition and diversity of diets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes, attention from subsidies and other investments to those more nutritious crops. Let's go to Nima, and after Nima, I think I saw a hand from Hasina. Go ahead, Nima.
Thank you, Julie. What I wanted to touch on, I think it's important for our governments and development partners to find ways in which we can strengthen our extension services, to make sure that our farmers are getting reliable extension services, whereby we'll be able to use, proper seeds, proper fertilizer, proper pesticides, but also to look at the whole issue of transportation. Because in most African countries, the transportation, it adds almost 40% of the cost, which then makes our food systems not to be as efficient as they may be. And then finally, to also look at the issue of post-harvest loss. There's a lot of post-harvest loss in countries like Tanzania and I believe other African countries, whereby we could see how to strengthen all of these blocks, which in the long run will strengthen our food systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. Absolutely. Post-harvest loss and transportation infrastructure in general is a huge issue, and it would be game-changing if there were some substantive advances in those areas. Hasina, I think I saw your hand up a little earlier. I don't know if it still is, but would you like to share a comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. I am from Madagascar. For us, especially for rice sector, first of all, we developed a dialogue approach between all rice stakeholders here, from to a producer and to consumers for building an common vision, common action to develop together rice sector in the country. And the most important is each categories of rice stakeholders in each step to contribute to the development of value chain, rice value chain effectively, share and understand one information for the global sector rice, for its making decision about investment, for example, to contribute of public policies develop in. Are you hear me?
Yes, yes, we hear you well. Thank you. Thank you, Hasina. That's a very, very pertinent comment. And my organization, Academia 2063, a lot of the work that we do also is to help strengthen dialogue between different stakeholder groups to contribute to decision-making and policy-making.
Do you hear me?
And oh yes, we hear you. Can you hear us?
Sorry, I have network problem, perhaps.
Oh, no problem. We can hear you, but you can also share the rest of your comment in the chat if that works better for you. But thank you for your comment. It's very, very pertinent. And we hear you, Hasina. I think you can't hear us very well, though. I'd like to move on to, I see a hand from Natalie.
Yes.
I'd like to move on to,
okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So do you hear me now? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I am Natalie. I am from Madagascar originally, but now I'm based in Stockholm in Sweden. I work for International Foundation for Science. We support young scientists in developing countries. And I'm responsible for food science and nutrition research and social science research. Just one thing, I think it has been already mentioned, education. I hear that education for women, for teenagers, but what I would like to change, if it's possible, why don't you include this nutrition even for young children, that really education and what is healthy food and how good it is and what you have in our environment. And I know probably there is not really good equity when it comes to quality of education, but I would like really this to happen in rural areas. I don't know where the food insecurity is worse. Is it in poor urban people or is it in rural urban people? But I would like really that to see that to be included in the primary education. And it's so sad that these people producing food for us in rural area, they would understand how valuable they are there and themselves, how they can really, play around when you say that diversity of your diet change this. So I think that's a big change. If you include that also in our education. Don't wait until you are a specialist at the university or dealing with health issues, but it should be also included in our basic education. And not only cities. Please, I would like really to happen that in rural areas. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And also a really good point that education at all levels, starting with primary, needs to include more on nutrition to help people, to help consumers to make good choices, to have healthy diets. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately. So I think in our last 2 minutes, we should be discussing our last point, which is the role of high-level African champions to advance the African perspective going into the summit and also coming out of the summit to advance these solutions. So we can discuss the role of these champions, but also to identify specific people, specific policymakers or practitioners who we could consider to be potential champions to advance this African perspective and African solutions. With 1 minute left, do we have thoughts on this? Do we have suggestions on who we could look to for these champions?
Hi.
Nima.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. I think the African Development Bank, for example, has leaders for nutrition, which includes like presidents and leaders from across the continent. So, I mean, instead of sort of thinking about new people, I think there's a lot of leverage we can get from working with the leaders, the African leaders for nutrition that have already been sort of put forward by the African Union and the African Development Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. It's an important point. A big goal of this summit is.
Oh, that was Liz.
Oh, that was Liz. I'm sorry, Liz. I think I saw Nima's hand, but okay, thank you, Liz. Yes, good point and important to not reinvent any wheels here. Nima, you had a hand up also.
Yes, what I wanted to say is that I also wanted to touch on the African Union nutrition champions, but I was also going to propose that, you know, at that level, at presidential level, it's not like they're involved in like day to day, or you can just easily call them to be pushing agendas and stuff. So it's not a bad idea to also consider other potential people who could support and leverage the efforts of those African champions, maybe regional champions or things like that. And they may have a targeted focus, for example, to ensure that, you know, governments would prioritize food systems and increase the public, you know, public budgeting in those particular areas. So I think it's good to have the African Union level champions, but consideration can be made also for the next level down. Those are the people who could be pushing the agenda more vigorously, so that the presidents can then get inputs from these ones and push the agenda further at, you know, at the presidential or that level kind of discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. And Professor Sibanda, I think you will have our last word on the breakout session. I see your hand, so go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to support Nima's point, I'm all for, because we want to see more people's voices. So let's try and go out there and identify influencers across the different social groups. I'm thinking here of the youth, especially with social media and, you know, things like that. And let's also identify women that can speak on behalf of their constituency, and both in urban and rural areas, so that those voices can be heard, especially at a global and higher level scale. Let's equip them with the right messages, right information, so they can articulate their positions better. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sibanda. And thank you so much, everybody, for all of your contributions. I'm sorry we had such a short time, but the ideas that everybody has stated are really important ones. And we're very pleased to have them, and we'll definitely ensure that our outcome document of this dialogue reflects your contributions today. So I think our break is right now. Why don't we all take a very quick break, and we're scheduled to reconvene in this plenary room in just a few minutes. Anything you didn't get a chance to say, please do feel free to share it in the chat box on the side. So thank you again, everybody, very much.
I would like to welcome everyone back to the breakout group discussions. Also, allow me to acknowledge the chairperson of Panalapan Board, Professor Cindy Osho. I actually just noticed via the chat that she is in the meeting. Thank you, Prof, for gracing the meeting with your presence. I trust and hope that we all have had fruitful discussions in our groups. And may I now invite the Chief Rapporteur, Ms. Tembi Mwamakamba, to present feedback from group discussions. Tembi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. I think it's not an easy thing to summarize what has been quite a rich discussion in the different groups that we had. We had groups that were split into 4, and in each of the groups, the same questions were discussed. So what I'm going to present now is just highlights of what were the key emerging points that were probably common across the different groups. So first off, I think what was noted is that everybody wants the food systems to change. We all acknowledge that there is a challenge and that we need a change, and that food systems are currently governed and they leave too much devastation. The way the food systems are currently governed leaves too much devastation, and that we definitely need some concrete actions. So for instance, I'll just pick across from the different groups. In group 1, they spend quite a sorry, not group 1, I think that's group 2. They spend quite a bit of time looking at what the challenges are that have affected the food system. So they were looking at things like factors of production. They were looking at how the middle income farmers, how they are incorporated into the whole food systems, and how smallholder farmers don't have access to capital, which then limits them in terms of their production. So there's a need to sort of change the focus from smallholder farmers to other farmers as well. We want the smallholder farmers to graduate from being smallholder farmers to be medium and large scale farmers so that they produce enough food. In group 1, on the other hand, there was a discussion around we should stop being too worried about how much farmers produce, but we should be looking at the quality of food that's being produced. I think that sort of spilled into the discussions around what opportunities exist to ensure sustainability of resilient food systems. So some of the issues that came out under that question is that there's need for us to have innovation. There is need for innovative multi-stakeholder partnership. That was one thing that was raised quite prominently across all the groups. Then there was also the need for responsible private sector that understands the constraints that producers and farmers are facing. So the role of private sector was also discussed quite a bit across all the groups. The need for private sector to be responsible, the need for private sector to also work hand in hand with small and emerging farmers. I think another thing that was emphasized right across the groups is the need for investment into value addition. So when we look at the food systems, from farm to fork, there are so many opportunities along that value chain for value addition. And there was a feeling in some of the groups that has not been explored, has not been strengthened, and that there's need for us to actually look at value addition for all crops that are being produced, and also to have well-structured markets as well. So in terms of the game changers, I think in addition to investments in the value chain, there was also the issue around making capital available and accessible to farmers. Another group also said youth present an opportunity to actually change the way food systems currently are, because young people are innovative, they're energetic, and they have all these ideas that can possibly transform the food systems. Then there was also the discussion around in increasing like our diet diversity and making sure that we actually start promoting our own local African foods. There was in some of the groups there was mention around how we have wild fruits, things that are not sort of really used, but those are quite nutritious and can help address the challenges that we're currently facing of malnutrition and the like. So that was some of the game changers that were mentioned. The other one in another group, I think it was group 3, they talked about the need of recognizing the role of technology in food systems transformation. We know that in as far as technology is concerned, the continent is still very much far behind compared to whether it's Asia and South America, and that there is need to actually invest in technologies that work for our farmers, that also work for our context. The issue of collaboration between farmers, users of information, making sure that farmers get the right information so that they're able to adopt these new technologies was also raised quite strongly. Then when it then came to the discussion around the role of high-level African champions, who could be the voice for Africa at the Food System Summit, or who could advance the continental's perspective and solutions that can transform our food systems. In group 1, we had that at is it the African Union level as well as within the African Development Bank. There is a leaders forum, like there's the Nutrition Leaders Platform that we could tap into. So the idea is not to reinvent the wheel, but to actually make use of existing structures that have been put in place. So we do have this African Leaders Forum on nutrition, and we also have African Leaders Forum on climate change. So there are a couple of these that exist. And the idea is for us to be able to empower these champions with information, with knowledge, with science, with evidence that can help them to speak quite boldly on behalf of the continent. So part of, I think one of the groups actually suggested that part of that could be about synthesizing the discussions from this dialogue that we have had, packaging it into a 1-pager, into a 2-pager that we can then give to these champions that they can use to inform their sort of advocacy statements that they then come out with in the end. I think in a nutshell, trying to sort of look across the 4 padlets that we had going, those are some of the key things that I picked up coming out of the discussions. Over to you, Theo.
Thank you very much, Tembi. Thank you very much for the feedback from the group discussions. Very informative indeed. Well, I'm not going to repeat what was already mentioned. I will move on to the next item in our program. May I now invite Dr. Badiane to develop closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning. What a different picture.
Afternoon. Afternoon, Dirk.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me to address the audience and give the closing statements for this meeting. The deliberation were quite rich from the representative of CAMESA and Fund, IDRC and others, but also the deliberation breakout session and Tembe's reporting back. So thank you for all of that. We are very pleased and honored to have joined forces with FunPan for this event, and we look forward to doing more of that in the future. I think we're planning to have one with Western and Northern Africa in the coming weeks. We very much look forward to it. I will not be very long, but there are a few points I would like to share with you. The first one is, as we talk about the Food Systems Summit, it is important for us to perhaps note one thing. Food systems consist of the same components globally. You look at the chain, it's the same thing. However, those individual components have different weights depending on the geographies. One component may be very important and maybe where a specific country or a region faces the most challenges. And I think that's where that region or that geography should focus its responses and game-changing solutions. So we cannot treat the food system as the same everywhere and therefore expecting the same type of solutions everywhere. Therefore, for us on the African side, it's important to clarify where do we have the biggest challenges in the food systems? Where do we have the biggest opportunities for game-changing solutions? Judging by the African agenda, whether it's Agenda 2063 or the Malabo Agenda, the focus of the African agenda is accelerating growth and transforming African economies and food systems. That puts productivity, raising productivity at the center of all these efforts. Higher productivity gives you higher growth, gives you higher income, gives you higher purchasing capacity, gives you higher supplies, help the economies move faster. So for us, a starting point and the main component of the food systems that we have to worry about first are the productivity of our food systems, meaning farming sectors as well as the emerging staples processing sectors, but also productivity around other enabling services in the country. That's extremely important to look into that. If that fails, the issues of food safety, the issues of quality, the issues of social protection, the issues of access, all those things will not be deliverable because the circuit of it, making African food system much more productive, would fail. And then, of course, brings us then to what do we need to raise productivity in African food systems? We need better technologies. We'll need emerging technologies. We'll need to intensify production in a way that is sustainable. Can you hear me well? Is the mic okay? Yeah?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
you may continue. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So how do we get better seeds, better inputs, modern inputs at cost, using practices that are environmentally friendly, safe for environment, safe for human beings? These are scientific technology questions. So how do we get the science and innovation systems, institutions that help Africa to continue to modernize its agricultural sector, to intensify in a way that is environmentally sustainable? That is going to be extremely important for us to look into. We have a fast growing population, we have a fast rising demand. There's so much potential for growth, income generation for smallholders that we need to pay attention to. The second point is the emerging processing sector. Within the next 10 to 15 years, 2/3 of our traditional staples, I'm not talking about wheat or rice or maize, although white maize might belong to our staples, but I'm talking about also your cowpeas, your cassavas, your millet, and the sorghums. 2/3 of them will be consumed in processed forms. What that means is that the processing sector is now the biggest bridge or obstacle between smallholder farmers and the rapidly expanding demand in the urban centers. If your millet is not processed, as a farmer, you won't sell it. If your yam isn't processed, as a farmer, you won't find the consumers. If your cassava or cowpea is not processed, as a smallholder farmers, you will not be reaching the urban demand. You will not be reaching the market. So what infrastructure used to be 30 years ago to link smallholders to markets is what now the processing sector is. So how to get the processing sector to be much more productive, much more competitive, to be able to innovate, to have access to new technologies is going to be part of the food system. then how do you make the food coming from there, 2/3 of it coming from that we consume coming from there, how do you make that food safe for environment and also for human being? That's going to be extremely important. So finally, the Global Food System Summit will be helping Africa achieve the ambitions of the food systems if it comes with ways of building on, enhancing, and aligning with the African agenda. The Agenda 2063, the Malabo Agenda. There are goals and ambitions and targets that countries and governments and organizations have committed to. They should be the foundation on which to build, not parallel to it, not above it or under it or to the side of it. I think it's going to be extremely important. We build on the existing, energize it, revitalize it, use it to engage with African governments, stakeholders, and the broader constituency in general. So thank you very much for allowing me to address the audience and to be part of this meeting. We look forward to the next iteration of this event on the western side of the continent. And again, congratulations for a great set of deliberations. So it was time well spent, I hope, for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much also, Dr. Badiane, for the closing remarks. In my language of Bambo, there is a saying which goes, no hua pandura no yaka, which means if you are a person who doesn't say thank you, then chances are that you may end up stealing. We therefore thank each and every one who participated in the event, which I'm sure we can all declare a success. We thank our speakers, panelists, facilitators of group discussions, and all of our participants. Your presence has been valuable. Now, we have come to the end of the session. I just want to say goodbye to everyone. And if I can just quote one of the panelists who said, it is time to act. We need to act now so that we transform Africa's food systems. Have a blessed week ahead, everyone. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Theo.